let's get into this debate with Michael Crick, who is a broadcaster and journalist, bit of a legend of the lobby, and James Melville, who is a political commentator as well. You're both very welcome to talkTV this morning. How are you both?
I'm very well, thank you.
Great stuff. Michael, we've had a lot of people thinking, do you know what, Parliament's been on holiday for too long, then this period of mourning, then it's going on recess. Again, what are our parliamentarians actually doing? You've been to conferences over many years. You know probably more about conferences and how they work than any other journalist. Tell us what sort of the case for having them is in general, and then maybe you could give us the case for having them this year if you believe they should go ahead.
Well, the party conference is the annual gathering of the whole party. Anybody can go. I mean, maybe in Labour's case, you're elected as a delegate by your party. I think in the Conservatives' case, any member can apply, and any member can apply with Labour or the Liberal Democrats to go as just an observer anyway. And it's a sort of equalising forum. Everybody's there. You can, as James was saying, your previous contributor, that you can badger, Keir Starmer or the party leader, tell him or her what you think the party should be doing or what the government should be doing, and it would be a disaster if they were to be cancelled in general, and certainly I think this year at a time when there are so many big issues right now: Ukraine, the health service, the cost of living, inflation, the economy, the new government. And lots of things I haven't even mentioned. And to say, oh, well, we can't have a party conferences because the Queen has died, I think it's going too far. I mean, I can understand why the Liberal Democrats have done it, because their conference clashes with the Queen's funeral, but not Labour and the Conservatives. Indeed, I even suggested that perhaps Labour and Conservatives, as a token of national unity at this time, should pay the Liberal Democrats a bit of compensation for what they've lost for losing their conference.
They are a big money spinner as well for the parties. They do help in terms of getting money into the party coffers. James Melville, you've been waiting patiently there. What do you think of what Michael Crick has said, and why do you think that party conferences shouldn't go ahead this year?
Well, I think there's a sort of another option here. They could be stripped back. I mean, do the politicians in Parliament need to be there the whole time? Surely Parliament could stay open. You know, for instance, when there's a Tory party conference, it's not conferences of the other two parties, so therefore those politicians could be in Parliament. And also the politicians that aren't speaking a particular day at their own conference could be in Parliament. So yes, I understand why it's a good revenue stream for the parties, and it's a good way for the members to all get together within the party. So have the conference, but surely keep Parliament open at the same time, because of the two reasons I've mentioned. You know, when it's not the party having a conference, those MPs will be in Parliament, combined with the MPs don't need to be at their own conference the whole time. They could surely do both. They could be at the conference when they're speaking, and they could be in Parliament when they're not speaking. You get the best of both worlds.
I want to come back to both of you, but I just want to read you a couple of comments from our listeners and viewers. First of all, Phil in Cheltenham says, the country's interests should be paramount, never mind preening at a self-congratulatory political selfie convention. People are suffering, says Phil in Cheltenham. Mark in Lancashire, Mark in Lancashire, Jackie says, I think it's dreadful, Peter, that party conferences are going ahead. It shows how aloof and entitled these politicians are. They are there to serve the people, but instead they're patting themselves on the back of how brilliant they are while the country is in ruins. Politics needs to change in this country because the entitled few don't care about the British public until they want your vote. The balance of power is too much in their favour, and it's not right while Brits are suffering. Michael Crick, what would you say to Jackie?
Well, I just think that the people who would be delighted if the party conferences were cancelled are the party leaders. Paddy Ashdown would have been delighted way back in 1994 when all these pesky young Liberals, led by a woman called Liz Truss, were calling for the abolition of the monarchy. He was furious.
Where is she now?
Tony Blair would have been delighted on numerous occasions if his conference had been cancelled. These are not meetings of the elite, or at least solely of the elite. It's an opportunity where the ordinary infantry of the party can badger and tell the elite what to do. Now, they'll be ignored a lot of the time, but they're also, I mean, the thing about the party conference, it isn't what goes on in the hall that matters. I mean, I barely watch that when I go. It's all the fringe meetings, and the fringe meetings are fora of all sorts of new policy ideas. You go along to a fringe meeting on some subject you don't really know much about, and you come away invigorated, thinking, yeah, there's some interesting policies there. And that is why they're so important. It's an opportunity for ideas to be discussed and debated and rejected and accepted. They really are a vital part, I think, of our politics. Although I suppose the debate we're having now is twofold, isn't it? It's a debate about whether they should be cancelled this year and the debate about whether they're any use in general. But essentially, I think the arguments are the same.
Yes.
Too many decisions have been made this year which have gone too far, out of respect for the Queen.
Yes,
when the Queen
but Michael, on that point, Michael, I mean, James makes an interesting point, doesn't he, about what if they could be truncated for a while, just make them a bit shorter, perhaps, maybe a day and a half. Why do they have to be, certainly for Labour and the Conservatives anyway, 3.5 days? I mean, that or possibly longer if you arrive on the Saturday. I mean, that is pretty long, isn't it?
Yeah, they could, and they could take, Parliament could still sit. I mean, I think it was, 3 years ago during all the Brexit shenanigans, where the Parliament was meeting at the same time as the conferences, if I remember correctly, and ministers would just come up for a day. And and most MPs don't actually go to their party conference these days anyway, because it's too expensive for them. They go for the day and take activists from their own party out to lunch or something. But you don't see that many MPs at the party conference.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Anyway.
Yeah, a number of them actually just don't go. So, James, what do you think of what James, what do you think of what Michael has said there in terms of the fact that, he sort of slightly agrees with you in that Parliament could possibly sit and so on. But have you been to a party conference, James, yourself?
I've been to party conferences in sort of the bygone days of my career. Yeah, and everything that Michael said is correct. I mean, it's more than just, token speeches. There's a lot of work going behind the scenes. There's a lot of different groups involved to inform MPs and members about, not just in terms of party policy, but also about what's actually going on in the world. So I think the conferences, there's an argument obviously to keep them going, but Parliament should stay open. We're facing one of the biggest economic crises on record. It's not just about party conference. We've obviously got the period at the moment morning, combined with a rather shoddy leadership election that seemed to go on forever and ever and ever, combined with summer recess. There's an argument that basically we've now had, say, 3 or 4 months where Parliament has been part-time at the very best during a national emergency. During national emergencies, Parliament should not be shut. For instance, Liz Truss's measures that have been, going to be debating over the next few days, these measures should have taken place months ago, whether it was Liz Truss, whether it was Boris Johnson. But part of the reason they didn't take place is because of the leadership election and also Parliament being in recess. Conferences in addition to that. And I think that's what's provoked the debate this year. It's on the back of all the other aspects of Parliament.
So you think the recess should be scrapped completely then? Because there's an interesting point, because Lindsay Hoyle, actually, the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has argued in the last few days that the conference recess, which is actually a week longer than, or is due to be a week longer than the Conservative Party conference. So there's a week where really nothing is happening after the Conservative Party conference, that week at least should be scaled back. I mean, isn't it time, James, you would argue, I presume, for our parliamentarians to get back to work?
Yeah, completely. We're going through a national crisis, and we pay our politicians to try and resolve that crisis, and part of that is a functioning Parliament. It's not just about putting legislation through. It's also about the scrutiny of legislation. It's also about the select committees that go through that. It has to go through the House of Lords as well. Parliament right now should be open. It should be fit for purpose to get us through a national crisis, at least try and get us through a national crisis, not leadership elections, summer recess and party conferences, truncating Parliament to such a point it's only open for a few days over a 3-month period. That is not good enough.
Do our parliamentarians have too much time off, Michael Crick, in general?
No, I don't think they do, but I do agree, and I agree with virtually everything James has said. I think it's absurd that Liz Truss announced the outline of her energy package on Thursday, the week before last, on the day the Queen died, and that should have been debated properly in Parliament this week. And we've missed too much time. And it's not just a national crisis we're going through in terms of the economy right now. Things are getting very serious in Ukraine. The international situation is extremely serious as well. And certainly that week, I wasn't even aware of the spare week after the Conservative conference. Certainly Parliament should come back for that. And James is absolutely right. It's not just about legislation. It is about holding the government to account. And we're in this absurd situation now where Liz Truss appointed half her ministers before the death of the Queen. And the half the government isn't there, and there are all sorts of ministers and MPs who don't know whether they're still in government
it's weird. It's actually Lord Goldsmith. Zach Goldsmith is in that situation where he's been told that he's been sacked as one of the environment ministers at the DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, but it's not official yet because nothing's official until Tuesday. So he'll actually, I presume, be paid if he takes a salary. He's a multi-millionaire, but he'll be paid until he's in that position anyway, until Tuesday. So we do have this very strange situation where the reshuffle is sort of in a state of suspended animation as well.
And of course that affects all the lots of other people as well, the civil servants, and of course this government is inclined to sack civil servants, as we've seen.
Yeah.
And of course all this, dear to your heart, Peter, all the special advisors. I mean, there's only sort of half a government right now. The only good thing about it, I suppose, is it does give Liz Truss and the ministers she has appointed a bit of time to think about what they're going to be doing.
Yes, and bed in
their priorities before they have to address Parliament.
And this is, I mean, James Melville, this is a very weird time, isn't it? It's pretty much unprecedented in terms of where we are politically. Could this time, even though it's obviously a period of national mourning, it's a very sad time, we remember the Queen and her huge dedication to this country, but if there is a time when politicians can actually have a little bit of breathing space and possibly, as Michael Crick says, think things through, read into their briefs, get to know their civil servants, do the sort of behind the scenes kind of stuff that they usually don't get time to do. They've got to sort of hit the ground running. Could that actually be a good thing, James Melville?
Well, it's only a good thing if it becomes a good thing, if they're actually doing that and they come up with proper legislation to get us through the next few months. Going back to the cost of living crisis, this has been going on not just over the last few weeks. There's been warnings about rising inflation for months and months and months. And we've had a number of reasons why the government haven't got on top of that. They've been distracted by other aspects, leadership contests, some are racist and so on. Inflation's been going up all year. Now, we're still at a point whereby, yes, we've got some ideas that are coming out of the government, but no formal legislation about to put them into place and no scrutiny. This will take us until the end of October to get this through properly. That is too late for too many households and also too many businesses. Businesses are going under already because there's no cap. Well, there wasn't any cap for businesses in terms of energy, for instance, energy prices. And it's too little too late. The government had been asleep at the wheel for months on this issue. And then you combine that with all the aspects of Parliament being effectively part-time or closed. And the taxpayer, households and businesses are looking aghast at our politicians saying, when are you coming up with solutions to get us through this? Because that is effectively what's provoked the debate about party conferences.
Absolutely, and I want to get into all of that, especially in terms of what you two gents want to see or should think needs to happen within the fiscal event on Friday. We're going to some of those quite typical messages actually to this station. There is a lot of disillusionment with politics at the moment, and we are going to hear quite a lot from the new Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng in this ludicrously entitled fiscal event akin to a budget, or FEEB, which is going to be happening next week, as Regina in Mean Girls might say, stop trying to make FEEB happen. But James, first of all, what do you think needs to happen on Friday for Kwasi Kwarteng to get people on board and to give some of the answers? We've had, obviously, the energy plan already, although it's not costed. Do you think tax cuts are coming? What do you think's coming and what do you think should be coming?
I think there might be some movement on national insurance and reducing that. They've hinted and nudged at that over the last few weeks. I think it needs to go further in terms of further cuts to taxation at this point, because it's not, people are focusing largely on households over the next few months, but it's also about businesses as well. So what I would do is slash VAT, not necessarily on a permanent basis, but certainly to get us through the winter. That will give more wriggle room, not just for stealth taxes for individual households, but also for businesses at the same time, combined with national insurance as well, and possibly a conversation about corporation tax going down. So there needs to be some leeway for households and businesses.
It's really interesting you mentioned businesses, James. I think that's a really, really important part, because those small and medium-sized businesses, basically a business that employs 8 people or fewer, so many single-person businesses, the plumbers, the plasterers, the hairdressers and so on, who keep this country moving and are the backbone of our economy, and many of them them, of course, are people who pay a lot of tax and actually aren't affected by the price cap in terms of energy. Michael Crick, I wonder, I mean, we haven't heard a lot from Kwasi Kwarteng. People obviously may know him, they may not know him. He was the Energy Secretary previously, now he's the Chancellor. This is going to be a big outing for him. What do you think politically needs to happen for him to make an impression, for people to listen to him, and for the Conservative Party to maybe claw back a little bit in the polls? Because they don't seem to have had, obviously the Queen in the middle of it all is another factor, but they don't seem to have come back in the polls. They don't seem to have had a Truss bounce so far.
No, he needs to do some measures that are memorable, that he will be associated with. That's what any big politician needs to do. And this, I mean, it's a mini budget, isn't it?
Yeah.
And a mini budget, you're not allowed to say that anymore, because that's associated with Labour in the 1970s and Dennis Healey, who had a mini budget every 3 months. But that's what it is. And I think that if he's going to get rid of the cap on bankers' bonuses, he has to do something incredibly strongly in the other direction to show that he is not a man of the elite, the rich, the people that who bankroll the Conservative Party. He's got to actually get to terms with the fact that it's the poor, it's the lower paid, the one that are most hit by inflation and the cost of living crisis, the people who are getting wage rises which are significantly less than the rate of inflation and who haven't had a real terms wage rise for years. And so he's got, if he is going to bring down taxes, it's got to be really, really loaded at the lower end. And the higher paid really should not be getting tax cuts. Sorry, if he's going to bring in tax cuts, he should not be bringing in tax cuts that are going to benefit the rich. The other thing I think he's got to think about is that the government announced in May that they're continuing with the transfer from benefits to universal credit and hope to get the whole thing finished by 2024. I mean, this has been going on for years and years and years, but and that they're going to get a move on this in the next few months. I don't think that. I think they need to delay that a bit further. I know it sounds absurd because it has been going on so long, but to have everything going up in your shopping basket, and your petrol station and everything else at this time, and then be told you're moving to a new benefit and it's complicated and you don't get it, you only get it once a month and so on, is going to be a real burden for many people. And above all, Kwarteng needs to show empathy, which Liz Truss signally has failed to do, frankly.
It's interesting with Kwasi Kwarteng because I'm going to talk to James Melville in a second, but just a final thought from Michael Crick on this. I mean, we haven't really, most people won't really know who he is, let's face it. I mean, 6 months ago, I remember a pollster, Joe Twyman, telling me that, over 50% of people in this country had not heard of Liz Truss, literally had no idea who she was. And Kwasi Kwarteng is not going to be someone who most people really know at the moment. And the only thing that a lot of people will have registered with him is that he wants to abolish the cap on bankers' bonuses. That just doesn't strike me as something that is politically wise. Whether it makes sense economically or not is another matter, but it just strikes me as really, really bad optics as kind of the first move or potential move for a Chancellor. What do you make of that, Michael?
It's absolutely nuts. I mean, especially as I was just saying, is that Liz Truss, when she was elected leader, made a couple of speeches, and there was no sense in them that she understands the horror that many ordinary people in this country are going through financially, and how they don't see how they're going to get through the winter. And to be associated with a measure like that at this time, when he's so unknown, as you say, is utterly bonkers. And I mean, it may make financial sense. It may make financial sense. It makes political no sense. Yeah. And the thing about a politician is you're often defined by one act.
Yes.
Ed Miliband was known as the man who knifed his brother, and after that, he couldn't get known in the public eye for anything else.
Well, the bacon sandwich maybe, but
Tony Blair was the man who tried to who abolished Clause 4.
Yes, yes,
and that was that benefited him. And so, as I say, he's going to have to do something really, really strong in the opposite direction.
Yeah,
everybody forget about the bankers' bonuses.
Ed Miliband knifing his brother. I think we can safely say, Michael, that the political coverage at that time, certainly on BBC Newsnight, was at an absolute at its zenith. I would argue when the political editor was Michael Crick and one of the political producers was me. But I remember one of our colleagues saying David Miliband was the only person who left politics to spend less time with his family, which was a great line. James Melville, just finally, you've been nodding along to what Michael's been saying on bankers' bonuses there. What's your perspective on this?
I completely agree. It's terrible optics. We need governments to serve the people rather than bankers. I mean, there's legacy attached to this. This goes right back to, say, 2008, 2009 financial crash, where effectively the banks were bailed out. And taxpayers' money ratcheting up quantitative easing largely to do that, and then a decade of austerity. There's a whiff of this pattern happening again. So I'm not buying. I think it's a terrible first move. I think the public will be turned off by this. And yes, if he wants to create a legacy for himself in the first big statement, I would suggest he does stuff that will help households and small and medium businesses rather than bankers. There's also just one other point I'd like to add. I'd like to see the government think long term and actually having, beyond the statement, think about a long-term energy strategy, both in terms of supply and also prices, because that is part of the reason we're in this mess.
Two very, very wise contributors, great contributors. Thank you so much to Michael Crick, broadcaster and journalist, and also to James Melville, political commentator. Brilliant to hear your perspective on a number of political issues there.